Eliminate the suck with your dynasty teams. A shout out to David Dodds, longtime content producer over here at Football Guys, mostly for redraft teams. We're going to spin it ahead to your dynasty teams. What to avoid, how to help the floor of your dynasty outcomes here. That and more this week on the Football Guys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, a lot of times having the tips of what not to do is as helpful as target players with who to avoid and what strategies to avoid as well.
Yeah, I mean, the number one don't do for me is don't sell elite players for depth. Right. I mean, elite players carry you, they raise your floor, they raise your ceiling. Depth does not do that. So depth actually sinks your floor and drops your ceiling. So, don't get in the habit of doing that. People love to do that. People love to build from depth by selling off pieces, whether that's in a rebuild or in a, in just an existing team build or in a startup draft. Right. Don't fall into that temptation.
Yeah, and another way to phrase that, and just to continue on that theme, is saying the best player in the deal. I coach through dynasty trades so much on a regular basis, and it's hard to get around selling the best player or asset in a trade. And that's sort of what you're saying, of building out depth. Now, you may be in a rookie draft environment or a startup draft environment where you say it's a flat tier. I got one pick in this zone. I'm going to get one of these. I don't really have a strong preference. That's different, and the person trading with you is going to prefer one. So obviously they're viewing that there is a best player or asset in the deal. But, trading 107 to 109, you're like, it's all the same. I don't really have a target player here. That's a different conversation. But, the common, selling $1 for a 50-cent piece in 3/4, that's what we're talking about. And I love what you said, which is if you're in a rebuild, if you're in an orphan, you have one or two pieces, really assess how good those pieces are, because if they're core level, you build around that. You don't tear it down. You don't light it on fire, because that means you're going to have to get fortunate with the picks you're getting. You're taking suboptimal or lesser players and pieces and profiles. And now those have to become as good as you had before for you to even become level with where you were when you took over that team.
Yeah, for sure. And it's such a temptation, right? I mean, I think when you rebuild, right? And I just did a series up at the site, so you can check it out. It draws on this a little bit, but I think when people want to rebuild, they want to tear down the top piece, right? And that's never the answer, right? That should never be the answer, right? Your solution, right? Your approach should be, I need to surround those elite pieces, those top 30 pieces with another top 30 piece, or with another top 50 piece, or another, keep kind of pushing up in that direction as opposed to pushing down. And I just look as many top 30 guys as you can get on a team, right? If it's 4, you're in really, really good shape. And right, as you start looking at your team, sort of looking in that direction, if you've got 2 of them, right, can you add another one? And if you can add another one, that's pretty close to being league average. And I think you shoot in that direction instead of tearing them down, because they're really hard to get. It's really, those are the trades you spend a lot and you take a lot of energy to get top 30 guys. And, I find that people do it way too much.
And one thing that is far different now than, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when I think 2008, I did my first startup draft, and everything then was one quarterback. It was stock PPR or non-PPR across the board. And in today's landscape, Superflex is becoming far more common. To my trade calculator, I just added 5 or 6 versions of tight end premium, or whether 2 tight end with premium scoring, 2 PPR, so many iterations to the tight end positions specifically. Sometimes you have point per target tiered or across the positions. There's a lot of nuances, but I'll say this: playing the format is a stock phrase that I don't think people give enough credence to. So I will say this: you got to hammer over and over again and have just such persistence, whether it's trading or building up your depth, rookie draft focus, whatever it is, with the premium positions. And a lot of times it comes down to quarterback and tight end, with the way these, modern, I'll call them modern dynasty leagues, are being built out format wise. And a lot of the ones, especially if they're private and if they're not big box sites, you see a lot of twists that people add to these positions. I think it makes it fun. B, one tight end with 1 PPR. I'm not going to say it's Duplo blocks, but it's not the most imaginative thing out there, and it doesn't give the position enough credence. That can be more of a systematic and systemic conversation we have in a future show. If we just start to say, why don't tight ends score? How can we make them more meaningful in dynasty leagues? All this type of stuff. But I will say, if you're, we talk a lot about super flex with 6-point passing touchdowns, and you might have 2 PPR for tight ends or start 2. Those are really the 2 positions that, if you start somewhere, or like you're saying, build out, if you have 2, 3, 4 core guys, how about you have all of them or almost all of them at those positions? That should be your focal point. So I think a lot of people, and when I take over orphans, I'm looking for that. Like I was hunting this past week for orphans. I took over 3 or 4. Okay, I'm lying, 6. No, but what I'm looking for is what can I fix and what is tougher to fix. And frankly, you go in, and if you have a stud quarterback, QB2 is a lot easier to fix. So we're talking about eliminating the suck. If you're walking out here and you don't have a top 12, top 15 quarterback, you're starting almost from ground zero. And I think the inclination is to go in your rookie draft and try to fix it that way. Oh, I have 102. Okay, so now you're thinking I'm going to draft the rookie quarterback because I don't have good quarterbacks. Okay, well, again, so looking at a startup situation with an orphan team, you go, if you have a strong quarterback, and if you have a stud tight end, like some of these teams, I was like, oh, there's Josh Allen, there's Mark Andrews. I can work with that, right? I mean, I can build that up. Everything else is easier to find because there might be 7 or 8 total players between quarterback and tight end that you say, I want to build around those guys. So you're almost operating from a position of level, because if there's 8 or 9, let's say, across the league, and you have 1 or 2 of them, you were just saying, do the math in top 30 players. That's sort of the same thing. Studs at the stud positions. So look for that as orphan teams. But if you have one of those guys, as you said, but your team isn't, quote, very good right now, you have that at least as an anchor point. So don't give that up.
Yeah, they can drag you a long way. I was looking just today, studs at studs positions. We should put that on a t-shirt. Right? We should do it. We should put that on a t-shirt. That's a great one. I was just looking today. I have a team where I traded for I got traded for Allen. I either traded for Allen or traded for Mahomes. I can't remember which one I did. But it's Allen, Mahomes, Kelsey, and Andrews, and a super flex 2 PPR for tight ends scoring system. And I don't know. My lineup's probably slightly better than replacement level, not very much over it, the rest of the other guys, but they're dragging me to a bye, right? Like those guys, like if you just start doing the math on those guys, right? Those guys are probably in that format dragging me to a bye with a pretty close to replacement level.
Well, that's probably, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 points a week, right? I mean, if it's 30 for the quarterbacks and 20 or something for the 2 PPR tight ends, that's 100. And I don't know what the average league score is, but I mean, you can get your Isaiah Hodgins of the world, finding lineup spots for you, and you'll be just fine along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just start doing the math on that, right? It's funny because conceptually we did a lot of warp study and like we did some warp stuff and all that stuff. And I just stepped back this past off season. I just started looking at the number and I'd be like, if you have like a replacement level roster and then you've got 3 guys that are a win and a half above that, like that's a playoff team. Right. Like that's the 4 of them is almost a bye, right? Like that's how basically the math works. And you're like, okay, like, and then you really make that realization, you come back and look at your team and you're like, okay, like, yeah, like I have that. That's my formula, right? That's absolutely my formula. I think people make it more complicated than that. Not that it's easy to do, but I think people make it a lot more complicated than that ultimately is. So I'll say the other one, like, I think it's true in startup drafts. We'll call it in the top like 75 picks of the draft. And it's 100% the rule in the first round of rookie drafts. Don't trade up for wide receiver. It's a horrible, horrible bet historically. Your odds of getting it right are not good. And unless that person's name is Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase right now in an existing startup draft, outside of that, right? No in the first round of a rookie draft, no in the top 75, 100 picks of of the NFL draft, right? You should be only taking trade up for wide receivers at very specific spots where tiers break. But otherwise, and that's like into the 30s, right? That's a very specific case by case rule. Like almost, you're much better off to follow the rule of never do it than to try and make a ton of exceptions to that rule. So just doing that, like that's especially in rookie drafts, like never do that in a rookie draft. Just whatever you can do, like put a shock collar on yourself, like like put glue or something in your hand so that way you can't press the button, whatever it is. Like just don't do that because it's a huge mistake.
So eliminating the suck is be careful and skeptical about trading up with uncertain assets, profiles, or positional values, right? I mean, so trading up for a stud tight end in a format that matters, valuable. Trading up for a cornerstone quarterback where there's tier breaks, or getting 2 strong quarterbacks instead of 1, that is prudent. But eliminate, if you were to embrace the suck, let's say, you'd be trading up saying, well, wide receiver 3 versus wide receiver, like a classic case would have been last year. You're in a position where you can just sit and take Jahan Dotson, let's say, right? I mean, that was one of our favorites where he was slipping to the second round. That's almost like the Josh Allen of quarterbacks rule, right? If you get a first round wide receiver fading like that, just take him, just take that guy. And saying, well, I'm smarter than everybody else, and I know of these other 4 wide receivers. This guy that I'm trading up for is way better than Jahan Dotson, for just as an example. So that would be one. And again, of unproven assets. And I see it. I'm doing a couple of Devy drafts right now. And when I see someone trade up in Devy, I mean, that is embracing the suck to a multiplier factor, because I mean, you are talking college players that their profiles aren't even built. I'll tell you one thing, Jordan, I'll say, eliminating the suck, I'm drafting more rookies in the rookie Devy drafts because I know what's going on with their profile. They're here. They're a month away from the draft. And like, for example, I drafted Dalton Kincaid in a 2 tight end premium. And it's like, well, I feel good about this profile and this range of outcomes versus taking who might be the tight end 1 of next year's class or 2025 or whatever. I mean, the variance in that is wild. And so it's funny. I've kind of looked back at my results, and when I take rookie profiles that I like in those combo drafts, so just not to go down a rabbit hole, but just there are rife with risk across different dynasty profiles that you got to really rein in, like you're saying, of just hubris of saying this is the guy and this is the profile. And wide receiver is one where, frankly, you look at the scoring, it's very flat, right? I mean, if you're wide receiver 14 versus 35, it's not really going to make the difference in any meaningful way to your team that year.
Yeah, hubris is the right word, right? Like it's funny, you look at like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where it's like, if you know nothing, you're very confident. And as you sort of start going along, with more knowledge, you realize I don't know anything. And then you start kind of growing back up after that. Like in Dynasty, like as I've sort of gone along more and more, I've had sort of less conviction about specific players, right? I have very specific convictions about strategies, about roster constructions, about sort of the how-to, right, the direction with which we want to make moves, like sort of those things, but a lot less conviction, especially as you get outside the top 30, top 40, top 50. Once you start getting out there, like those bets are hard to get right. They're hard to get consistently right. Like there's some stuff that you can do that can improve your odds. But being, avoiding that hubris, like you said, I think is super critical. And it's funny because you'll get people that'll say like, I'll have people sometimes say like, oh, you have take lock, or you have like, oh, you just like, that's an arrogant thing to say or whatever. And I'm like, really, like, I don't have a ton of confidence in the players that we're picking. And I actually think that we build a strategy around that, which is honestly the beauty of it, right? Being right strategically allows you to be wrong player wise and still be ahead. Right. So I think kind of understanding those things and not being too certain about your bets, I think is super helpful. And that comes from someone that does this full time, right? That spends, we were talking before the show about how much time we spend on this. It's a lot of time. And so just sort of have some humility about your takes and your strategy and have confidence in your strategy, but just understand there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think building a strategy that way can really, really help you.
I'll include one more, and this is something that David Dodds mentioned annually in his article that I always read, and the one that stood out with me that was redraft, but I would say going over to Dynasty has some year over year effect, which is he talked about not attaching yourself to the worst offenses in the league, and I would spin that for Dynasty as saying, when possible, it's an advantage to attach to a cornerstone quarterback that you feel is going to be a franchise option, whether it's contractually or they're on, a rookie contract, but well on their way to getting that second contract. And you know what? If Daniel Jones can get it, I think the threshold isn't overly high in terms of having confidence in other players that have performed far better and having coaching situations, front office, just infrastructure security of that entire franchise. When in doubt, especially with, if you are going to go down the rabbit hole of unproven player, you'd rather have them go into that ecosystem than one where there might be constant instability, coaching changes, quarterback searches, OC changes. When you see quarterbacks that are like, oh, yeah, I've had 4 OCs in 5 years, that's tough. I mean, you have to have the metal and I'm going to succeed no matter what sort of DNA of, imagine if they were in a stable situation. So that would be what I would say. When in doubt, if it is close and you are looking for stability, look at the coach, look at the OC. Again, OCs and coordinators are going to get churned out, if they're good, that maybe 2 or 3 years at most, but the quarterback there can be the stabilizing element. The one thing in the NFL that could be a 5+ year play where everybody else, who knows what's going to happen. So that's the one thing I would say. And he spun it for redraft, but I think it applies to Dynasty year over year as well.
Yeah, love that. Love that.
Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 147 of Footballguys Dynasty Show. And haven't mentioned in a while, but want to remind you to look like a champion with that Footballguys official gear and merch. You got the Black Eyed Joe logo you're all familiar with. It's all over the site. Quality designs, materials, outerwear, hats, shirts, coffee mugs, and more. Shop.footballguys.com. All right, we got some fun Dynasty trades this week, and you made a big boy trade with Josh Allen or Mahomes. We've talked about it before. Get those unicorn players and profiles. So we got a big one here. This is a format we've already mentioned this week, which is Superflex with 2 PPR for tight end. So it is start 1. We've got Jordan Love, Dalvin Cook, Amari Cooper, Dalton Schultz, and I believe this was before he signed with Houston. And then 102 this year and a 24 first from that same team. Same existing team here, and they get Patrick Mahomes and Adam Thielen. So it's a lot of pieces, Jordan, but how do you break down some of those profiles, either older, unproven, and then picks?
Mahomes. That's how I break it down. No. Again, like, it's the best player in the deal. He's a stud player at a stud position. So instantly you have to figure out a way to be really convinced to not go in that direction. Love's not proven. Delvin, like, think of what this deal could look like in 24 months. Okay. Let's fast forward 24 months. Okay. It
really could just be the picks.
There's a realistic possibility that Jordan Love's not a starting quarterback. Again, I like Jordan Love, but there's a realistic possibility that the following scenario is true. Jordan Love's not a starting quarterback. Dalvin Cook's not a starting running back. Amari Cooper's like a wide receiver 3 type in your lineup or worse. Dalton Schultz isn't a starting tight end. And you whiff on one of the picks, right? Like, really good chance that there's a chance that occurs. What is the chance? Go ahead.
Well, and also this, let's assume 102 is the QB1 this year. So pick whoever you want. You get your choice, and it's probably going to be your choice of, I would say, 2 quarterbacks in terms of likely to be the first quarterback off the board in your Superflex drafts. So you have the QB1 of this particular class that doesn't have, a glaring, you saw this coming 2 years from ago, Trevor Lawrence type. And then you have the 24 first that is based on the team that acquired Patrick Mahomes. And because everything else, let's face it, I mean, quality years remaining. Amari Cooper, he's yet to show big ceiling, right? I mean, for an entire season. And it is dependent on Deshaun Watson bouncing back, to previous levels. Dalton Schultz, ceiling. Dalvin Cook, ceiling on a 1-year play right now. Jordan Love. So, I mean, all those players combined could literally have like 2 quality seasons remaining. And Patrick Mahomes is on a trajectory to have what, 10? So, I mean, and you're consolidating 4 players into essentially 1. Thielen's probably going to not be on your roster in 2024, if I were to guess. So you're getting 3 roster spots back, actually 4 because 102 as well. And what do you do with those spots? Because it's a 28-man roster. I mean, you will get looks at running back, you'll get looks at tight end, backup quarterbacks. Like that's 4 roster spots is a lot of utility. And not to say that, you prefer a waiver wire guy over Dalton Schultz or anything, but just that's 15% of your roster essentially that you can churn extra.
Yeah. I mean, it's always directionally, right? Like again.
So I'll ask you, because we always try to flip this into how would this make sense? And one of those players needs to be better, right? I mean, that quarterback needs, like, if that was Dak Prescott, is that tolerable?
Yeah. So like here, let's use the one that I did this week to give you kind of the opposite side of this, like a kind of the way that I think it makes it closer. I did Watson, Goddard, and a 24 first for Allen. It is a 2 PPR for tight ends. That makes Goddard pretty valuable in the format.
Well, Goddard's arguably more valuable than any of those players.
Correct.
And then you have Deshaun Watson, who is higher up on the food chain than any of those players.
Correct.
And then you had a first, which there was a first in this one. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean,
that looks a lot better, right? That's a lot more quality.
Yeah. And so, and again, I still took the Allen side on that. Right. I was doing it from depth. Like, if I wasn't a good team, would I do that? Like, maybe not, but like the position I was in, like that made a lot of sense to do it. I think that there's almost certainly the pick is going to be late based on the construct of my team. So like that was kind of the lean on that deal. But that's much more like if you're going to sell, and again, like 48% of people like the Watson side on that deal. And by the way, there's a healthy dose of the dynasty community that just will not vote for the Watson side. So if you sort of bake that in, I think like if you put an equal quarterback in there to Deshaun Watson, right, at sort of an equal ADP, the market would take the package side over Allen in that one. So that's much more, again, I would still take the package side, or I would still take the Allen side, but I think that's the type of thing you want to like get a solution, right? What you're trying to do, the way you win a trade where Allen's not in it, or where you're taking the other side of Allen, is you have a quarterback that like has a fighting chance to outplay him, and you can hit big on the other pieces. Okay. And so
to make the risk worth it, right?
Correct. Right. Watson's got a fighting chance to play with him. I don't think he's as good, right? Again, he's coming off of a down season and all that stuff, and all the stuff that's happened. But when he's been on the field, he's been a walking top 6 guy, a top 6 finisher, right? That is playing in the ballpark of Josh Allen. And then you say, all right, I've got a tight end that I could conceivably hit as a tight end 1 overall finish. And I got a 2024 first that could break my way, right? That's the way you kind of make it happen. And again, those are you're hitting 2 premium positions and you're getting a future first. Like I think to make a deal like this, you have to do that. You didn't do that with anything in this deal.
Right. You took on older guys. Amari Cooper, player. As much as we like him, is approaching 30. Dalvin Cook, he might be changing teams. He's also looked like he lost a little bit of a step.
Yeah.
102 is not 101, in terms of the tradability probably, or what you could do post this trade. And just for transparency, like I got them a home, like this is an orphan I took over that didn't have much. And you see I had a bunch of like okay players in lineup spots. And I said, well, I think I had Josh Allen, and I was like, well, what if I were to pair Mahomes and Allen? And you kind of talked me through of like, I literally have that Devontae Adams and nothing else. Nothing.
Perfect.
And I think
you're a 4 seed.
I think it's going to be funny and fun though, to go through this season of saying I have 25 open roster spots essentially of how I could look at the rookie draft and moving around, but also just the waiver wire in general of like how much having the freedom of 20 plus roster spots to do things and having a cornerstone of, even if I don't, make the playoffs or whatever, like having 2 cornerstone players that eventually I will fix things and not having the 102 this year and not having my own first next year. I mean, wouldn't I be searching for Mahomes or Allen, like in terms of a best case outcome with one of those picks? So it'll be interesting. The other team, honestly, it seemed like they were, I'm not going to say bored, but they had a good enough team, and it's like, I got Mahomes, I got all this other stuff. It's like, yeah, keep doing that. and
Mhm.
and they chose to go with the, like, I'm building out my team. They traded half of these players away for just like random picks. Like they traded Schultz for 211 or whatever, and
Mhm.
I think like Jordan Love they traded for 111. I think we have actually talked about that offline, or
Mhm.
like that he's QB 4 or 5 of the class basically, or whatever,
Yeah.
in that trade valuation. But it's just like, so you pare it down. We've talked about this before. You pare it down to picks, to the studs, and then so you've obviously valued picks to acquire in a trade, so you're probably not going to trade the picks for players. See, that's the problem, is you get liquid, but then you don't turn the liquid into solid. You're just going to draft a bunch of young players and hope you get some combination of 7 guys that peak up in production at the right time.
Yeah.
Good luck. Good luck
Right.
over like 2 drafts. You're going to try to hit 70% on your
Yeah.
picks in a
Yeah.
massive way in the first 2 years of their lifeline. Good luck.
Really difficult. I thought I recognized this deal. It was the one you
I
sent
know,
me.
right?
I
Yeah,
totally
I sent it to you.
it happened like 5 days ago, and
Exactly.
I
I
was
tricked you.
I don't.
You
This is
fooled
what
me,
happens.
Jared.
Like a dad brain. I
Yeah.
can't feel my
You see a lot.
toes.
To
And all
be
of a
fair,
sudden, I get
Jordan, you see a
distracted.
lot of trades. You
I
write
do.
weekly articles at Footballguys about dynasty trading. It's and you're combing the database to find the deals that have narratives to them, and have examples in the marketplace. So
Mhm.
don't blame you. Now this one I thought was going to be interesting because you talked about basically trading up for wide receivers in a startup draft. So this is a
Mhm.
stock format PPR, and it's CeeDee Lamb for 108, 109, and 110. So it's 3 firsts for CeeDee Lamb, who a lot of people have as wide receiver 3 in Dynasty. I don't think they're in this room per se. But what are your thoughts? They are later picks. It's not super flex. What's your reaction to that deal?
So I've admittedly had a little bit of a hard time. I've played so much Superflex, so much tight end premium, that to readjust a little bit, I struggle a bit in terms of like thinking and valuing those late first. But and this has been helpful to me for what it's worth. The way I sort of approach that is I look at these picks and I just say, okay, let's convert them to super flex picks, right? Just so I can sort of keep my mind, let's just put them in the same currency of what I
They're
would be,
seconds. They're
right? They're
seconds.
seconds.
Yeah.
It's
It's like
3 seconds.
202, 203, 204, or something like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Something like that. Right. Yeah. It's in that range. Um, I mean, I'm not even a huge CD Lamb fan, but you're again, what are you doing? You're trading a top in this format. I mean, is a top 15 player, right? I mean, even if you're sort of low, even if you're sort of middling on his or low on his production, he's a top 15. Right? I think he's a first round startup pick, probably in the format, and you're trading it for a bunch of picks that are like in the 6th, 7th, and 8th round. Again, that
Yeah.
kind of violates our rule. Like, it's tough because it's not necessarily a premium position, right? This is the hard part about playing. Yeah, when you play a lot of super flex and you come back to playing start one, you got to kind of remember the premiums there. It ends up becoming that young elite
The
producing wide
problem
receivers are the premiums.
The problem with late firsts is that if you're not going to have monster running back depth in a class with big pedigree, which we're not projected to have this year, is that those late firsts, I feel the best player or best profile that's going to stare at you with at least one of those picks is going to be a tight end. So that's the unfortunate thing. Like I think back to that Evan Ingram, OJ Howard, David Njoku class. All those
Great
guys were
point.
pretty much going in the late first. And, if you're looking at this and you're like, well, 109 or 110 is Michael Mayer, or Dalton Kincaid, or, just one of those top tight ends, the positional value, is just tough there. So be careful because you're probably going to get squeezed out of a round one wide receiver. And then probably the optimal running backs are going to be gone. So you're going to either press at running back with one or at least one of these picks, or you're looking at tight end, or you're going to look at quarterback in a start one. Like that's the problem when you go to the late first, is that the drop off is a lot quicker. Like you were saying, you almost need a conversion chart. You're like, what does this mean in Superflex? Like read the cue cards, read the sheet that you get to use for your tests. The one thing I was thinking though, if you make this trade, and obviously you could make the trade directly and say trade CeeDee Lamb for a wide receiver and a first, if you wanted to quote unquote downgrade, or, like, here's what I would wonder. If you traded CeeDee Lamb instead of for the picks, or if now you have the picks, could you trade 2 of these picks for Amon-Ra St. Brown? Or could you trade, I made one trade where it was like George Pickens and 110 for Tyreek Hill. And so I wonder, is Pickens a late first and a start one? Like, is that basically like you could have traded CeeDee Lamb for Tyreek Hill in a first?
I figured
So
you'd
I'm
have
always
Pickens at 103 in the start one.
okay. Yeah. So I'm always thinking of these formulas, you know. So if you took these picks, it's 3 firsts, but not one of them is overtly early. So you're not probably going to get up there. But could you trade 2? Would someone in some league trade DK Metcalf for 2 of these picks? Or like I said, Amon-Ra St. Brown, or could you trade, you know, one of them for Brandon Ayuk? Like, I think there's ways to make this work, but I think you're taking on a lot of risk of the cascade aspect of a 2-prong approach. And I like CeeDee Lamb, like instead of trading it for the picks, I would have rather you explored a wide receiver you view as some sort of a proxy and 1 first is what I would ask.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Again, can you do that? And maybe the pick is a future one, right? Like maybe
Right.
you get
give yourself a shot at an earlier one, right?
Give yourself a shot at an earlier
Instead
one.
of 110. Now you could probably trade 110 for a future first, but you know what? That's not a guarantee. That also
Correct.
in a start one is not a guarantee.
Correct.
All right. Let's do one more. And I don't know where you're going to go with this, Jordan, because it's one of your children in fantasy football, but then also one of your local children with Buffalo Bills here. So we've got a stock format. We've got Austin Ekeler for James Cook and 110.
Yeah, so this one's interesting. Again, this is start one, so that pick is that you're feeling like a late second or earlier second if you're thinking super flex, right? That's kind of the way I'd price that out. Man, I like James Cook.
You're pro James Cook for this coming year. Yeah,
I really like Austin Ekeler. What does James Cook have to be to make Ekeler lose this trade? Right, that would be the kind of question.
Well, Ekeler probably needs to leave the Chargers, right?
Yes,
that's probably the biggest thing that would happen. Well, injury, but again, I don't think it's worth mentioning that in trades in general because that's obvious. I think if Ekeler leaves the Chargers, I mean that is a warm, snuggly blanket. And if he were to go somewhere else, excuse me for being skeptical that he's going to be optimized quite the way he has been years and years with the Chargers. Does Cook have outs to be like even within 3 or 4 points per game of Ekeler, like of the ceiling sort of looks at those players, do you think?
So let's go. This kind of harkens back to what we talked about earlier, right? And so I think that the answer to that question probably should be yes, right? Does he have outs? I think the answer to that question is yes. However, I have a lot of pause at the fact that James Cook, who again, I am a cautious optimism on, he is 28 in best balls right now. Ekeler is 3. You have to be exceeding. What was the hubris, right? It is an exceeding amount of hubris to think that James Cook is going to replicate Austin Ekeler this year. Even though I sort of, as you asked the question, I said, like, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that. I think is that, like, you just could kind of, again, let's tie this together a little bit. One of the things that get you in a ton of trouble is hubris, right? Specific bets. I think that's how you lose a deal like this, is to say, I think James Cook can pace him, but you're doing that in a way that's very contrarian to consensus, right?
But you're also 110. We just talked that 110 doesn't really matter though that much, right? So why are you so even if James Cook, you take on the risk, you end up being right. Down year for Ekeler, breakout year for Cook. And they're relatively close. And you're like, haha, I win. I got 110. That made all that worth it. And then you look back and you're like, I drafted a tight end at 110. I drafted, I drafted, a running back that went into a committee. Right now he's a backup. I hope the starter leaves, and he was drafted at 92 overall. Is that really, like, you did all that? And that yet the outcome's the other way, pull the zipper the other way, and it's Austin Ekeler finishes in the top 5 of PPR. James Cook is in a committee. He finishes at running back 23. And you're like, that really hurt me.
Right.
That's the downside the other way.
Right. Yeah. I'd much rather do a bet, like, to give you an idea, like, I'd much rather do a bet that is Yeah, I don't know if you can get all the way there. Like if that instead of it being James Cook, if it's Ramondre Stevenson, right? Like that, I'd much rather do a bet like that because there's still a big gap in terms of dynasty cost. However, the market's there with you is much closer in terms of redraft stuff, and so you can make a credible argument with like, hey, there's a chance like Ramondre Stevenson has the running back 1 overall in his range of outcomes.
You're trying to make it a two-way go, and what we're saying is James Cook might not be the best bet, or 110. I mean, if this were 105, we can have a little bit of a different conversation. And like you said, if it's Ramondre Stevenson at 110, we can have a different conversation.
Right, Pollard, like give yourself a shot to have the out. Whereas I don't think that James. Again, I like James Cook, but like if James Cook is running back 15 this year, we're probably super happy, right? I mean, that's probably a really good finish. Like Ekeler could beat him by a win and a half. You know what I mean? Like that you're never going to make up with that pick.
Yeah, and from the chat, we did have one that I did not mention in rattling off a few about CeeDee Lamb. They mentioned CeeDee Lamb for Chris Olave and a 24 first.
I'd run over my in the cutest moment that she is. I'd run over my 2-year-old. Like
so see, there you go. So it combined what you said, which is how about you turn one of those picks into a 24 pick instead of taking the late first now, and then Chris Olave again, you're taking a high success track guy year 1 where he's got outs to be ranked and valued higher than CeeDee Lamb. If he continues on the trajectory he's on this year. And getting Derek Carr helps, stabilizing his quarterback situation where it was a bit of an unknown 3 months ago. So that is a really good example, and that's one that was executed in the trade market. So job well done there.
Absolutely.
All right, we've got a couple. We got 2 quotes from the Football Guys Dynasty Forum. One of them, again, was just adding on to I found in the league chat about the team that traded Mahomes to me. They said the only reason, this was not prompted by, I wasn't poking the bear, but it was just the only reason I sold Mahomes was that 24 pick included. It should be top 3.
Again, the math on this, just remember 2 wins over replacement for Allen, 2 for Mahomes, right? Let's just say it's 3, right? Between 2 of them, it's 1.5. But in this specific format, it's closer to 4, but let's just assume it's 1.5 apiece. So you're at 3 total wins over replacement. Your normal win over your normal team, replacement level team is about a 3-win team, a little bit more than that in a 14-week regular season. Add 3 to the 3 of the replacement, so and already you're almost at a bye, right? You're almost at a bye. You're almost at a playoff seed, right? You're 6 and 8.
Worst case, you're going to finish 7th or 8th, right?
Correct. There's almost no chance that pick's a top 3 pick.
Right. And again, they don't know
if one of them got hurt, but
I'm like a badger. I'm like a dynasty waiver wire badger. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Like I go so deep. I almost want to have tight end roundup every week because I'm gonna be hitting that 2 PPR premium to an extreme fashion to find flex options because I'm not going to have that at wide receiver or otherwise. And just the number of running back backups I'm going to have, they have no idea.
Can I just some tight end, I need my tight end blanket. You're like my warm and cozy blanket on the tight end topic. Number 1, let's say for the sake of argument that I have some scar tissue on my brain from drafting tight ends in the first round, a la Evan Ingram, a la David Njoku. I wasn't in on OJ Howard at that cost, thankfully, but and I'm sort of sitting there this year in the later first, and Dalton Kincaid's available. Like, how do I sort of not feel bad about the 2017 classes? I'm sitting there with like the mouse in my hand, getting ready to press that button.
Yeah. Well, one thing is, the profile of elite producer in college is one that you probably prefer over decent producer and elite athlete. That you want, like the Mark Andrews profile or the Travis Kelce profile is a sound one where you say good enough athlete and elite producer. Dalton Kincaid, 99% production score in my model. I mean, we're talking a guy that he went from a low level of competition. He played at San Diego before he transferred to Utah for a couple of years. How does 19 touchdowns in 24 games and averaging over almost 18 yards per catch? Like if you're playing at a lower level, and he tilts offenses. He tilted the offense at Utah. And I mean, when I started looking at his efficiency, I think it was something, he's at 2.3 yards per route run in college and over 15 yards per catch for his career. And I was looking at that, and I think it's Mark Andrews and there's 2 or 3 other players that all hit those markers. And when you put round 1 pedigree, or even if he's like 35, like if he doesn't go round 1, he's going to be very shortly after. I think he'll go round 1 decently, easy. And when you put those markers together, he looks eerily similar to the top guys at the position. So yeah, I mean, to me, this year is a really good year in the 2 PPR for tight end, for 2 tight ends. It's a really good format because there's going to be a number of them and that are going to have strong pedigree. And I still think everyone's going to get take lock because Michael Mayer has been forefront of everyone's thoughts in Devy for years. He's been anointed. He has the golden helmet, and he may even go first in the NFL draft. But you don't get points per block. You don't get points per legacy school. And, you want the receiver is what I'll say. And Kincaid is the receiver. Mayer is going to be viewed as the high floor guy. But you know what high floor gets you? I think it gives you a ceiling of Pat Freiermuth. And Kincaid, of the top guys, has a ceiling that actually approaches those top 3 guys or top 2, or that ceiling, that tier that we think actually matters. So I think in 2 tight ends we're in a 2 tight end league. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how those top 2, 3, 4 tight ends are deployed, because I think in general people get tired of drafting tight ends, and there's some good pedigree to be had and some good upside profiles to be had this year.
Okay. So that's one. The second question that I have is, if I am on the scale of like reasonable optimism to this sounds like a cry for help, where does the following statement rank? I'm intrigued by Austin Hooper this year.
That feels like an abusive relationship that you continually go back to, and hopefully you have some honest circle of support in your life that can really point you out of that hole. Austin Hooper, we're going to do this again, aren't we?
We're going to do this. We're going to
do it.
I have
every year.
I have a math equation I need to bring to this podcast at some point. It's going to alarm all the George Pickens supporters out there about Austin Hooper this year. So
Austin Hooper in 2 PPR, you should.
In 2 PPR, Austin Hooper is going to outscore George Pickens.
flex decisions week 1 through infinity. Prefer Austin Hooper there. All right, yeah. This is, and we're going to finish off with a macro one about team and dynasty league activity. It's been tough to get anything going. So many teams for sale or otherwise inactive. So few owners who use the message boards or trading blocks, and most of the offers I get suck. So, what do you think about the offseason in general? Teams that generally don't wake up until right around the NFL draft or around rookie draft time. It could be a slog, January through May, April, to get things done.
Yeah, it certainly can be. I would say. I would say this, like, this is the time of year to be thinking big picture, right? So if you're struggling to get stuff done, right? I go through a similar process of this, right? I don't pay daily attention to all my teams in the off season. It's just a lot. But what I'll do is I'll take a couple of teams each week, and I'll spend some time like thinking about them. And I actually have a tracker. In the tracker, I'll write some notes to myself. I write stuff down. I'm weird. I'll write stuff down. I'll say like, hey, here's some stuff that I want to accomplish this year. Need to address like tight end 2, right? Need to make my tight end 3. Let's turn that into a tight end. Let's put him in a package and get him into a tight end 1, something like that, right? I need to recurate the back of my running back roster. I need to try and make a smart bet on a young wide receiver if I can at some point along the line, right? 4 or 5 things, put them down, right? Can I get a better quarterback 3? Something like that, right? Just whatever the case may be. And then I'll know that, right? And then I can come back to it. And then I can say, like, if I have 10 minutes, I can come and say, all right, like, let's see what I can sort of accomplish. And once you start looking at that stuff, right, you can then come back and say, all right, like, here's like 6, 7, 8 trades that might make sense for me to accomplish a couple of those things, right? And you can, boom, send them out. So that's something that I do now. And then I'll try, as I'm taking my notes, I'll try and send out those offers. And again, people aren't necessarily that plugged in, right? People are still on vacation, whatever, doing whatever they're doing from Dynasty, but you're putting in the work, right? You're getting the mental reps in, write them down, put a pin in them, come back to it, right? That's one thing I think super valuable. The other thing is like take a step back and understand some strategic stuff. Right now is the time to think bigger picture. Right now is the time to think about, trying to get some edges, right? To get some real macro edges in your league, right? The Dynasty team building guide, for example, I always put it out this time of year for a specific purpose, right? Because it gives you the edges when other people aren't paying attention to them. Other people are thinking about rookie drafts. Other people are thinking about, doing whatever, right? They're stepping away from football. But if you're really locked in, like you can get some strategic edges. By the way, I'll put a link in the show, FBG, the Football Guys promo code's still there for the team building guide. You get 10% off. I'll put the link in the show. But I think like thinking bigger picture here when other people are sort of doing other things, that's a huge edge, right? That's always going to be a huge edge. And then you can always come back to some specific moves and stuff when people start coming back, but you've already thought about them. You're already thinking ahead. You're already sort of identifying where you're making your plays. Just look at your teams, look at your rosters right now and say like, hey, here's the guys that I have a ton of exposure to, right? Here's the guys I roster in 3, 4, 5, 6X teams. Is that a decision that I really want to make? Right, maybe my goal throughout the offseason is to take, I don't know, maybe I have Alexander Madison at like 50%. Maybe I don't necessarily want to roster him that much. Right? Maybe I see this offseason as an offseason that he's actually been really high in value. Right? What's the type of trade, sort of thinking already ahead, what's the type of trades that I would want to move on from? And then when you start seeing some activity pick up, orphans being filled and all that stuff, you can make the moves in on them at that point. But kind of thinking ahead proactively, I think is really valuable right now.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And I would say if there is an activity in your league that you need to focus on what is active, and it may be half your league, but when someone does, I always like to have my notifications on when someone updates their trade bait, because it shows that they checked in with their league, they checked something with their team, they put players in that. And again, I personally don't think it's all that valuable as someone to get a deal done for your own team to use trade bait, but it at least jolts the league. And I think it's so make sure you have that notification on, because it means someone checked in with their team and now you can send them an offer. Does anything strike you as a potential buying opportunity? Or maybe you're selling something and you want to utilize that as maybe potential targets. So I would say that, especially if they say something that's opposite of what your approach is. Like say they say, looking to acquire a running back, and solidify my running back room, and, willing to give up, and you just see the trade bait and there's something of interest there. So if you're looking to sell a running back, and again, I think that's one of the common moves I make in the offseason is trading running back for solidifying maybe with a core wide receiver, helping facilitate a trade at a premium position at quarterback, whatever it may be. And so when you see something that aligns with that, hit it with a lot of interest so that when you do have an active potential partner, that you can optimize that, because you may not get 8 different teams in your league that have a cross section of these 4 months that they are active. So just take advantage of that. And I'll say this, I have even sent offers to a team that I know is right now an orphan, or I know is going to have a change in the GM, because that person's going to come in and be super active right away. And I mean, that's what happens when I take over a team. I get in there, I know what I want to do because I already looked at the roster and I have a template for what I want to accomplish right away. And so if I were to walk in and I already have some trades in my inbox, I mean, again, it's a fresh landscape, and that new GM, that old GM probably wasn't doing much. So you have all these players and assets that the league might have been interested in, and now they actually can be interested in. You're going to be open for business. So I would say use those 2 things. Be open to sending offers to a team that's dormant, that's being replaced, because when they get back, you want to know that you're in the game. They want to know that there's going to be some trading involved, and they can pop in. There's already trades, and they can already begin negotiating with you. And I love what you said about all the macro stuff. I would say, in general, using league chats and message boards and saying, I'm open for business, taking offers on such and such, I'll take any second for this player, I don't find that overly works. I find you really need to construct offers, look for team weaknesses or strengths, Look for any commonalities of types of trades they make. Who likes rookie picks? Who doesn't like rookie picks? Be willing to buy from a team that always trades them away. Be willing to sell for a team that right now has 3 firsts. Give them a 4th. Do they have other players?
Right.
So feed into whatever you think that their go-to traits are as a trader. And also realize this, take the long game. This is probably something, if I pass it to you right now, you would say the same thing, which is you've got no deals done in a particular league. It's going to heat up. It's going to heat up at rookie chat. Just stick a pin in it. There might be guys you want to sell before the NFL draft. I get it. And so you should grind on that. But if they're not, the macro view is, well, they're going to wake up in May. So just wait for then. Take your notes. Take out the legal pad that Jordan sends everybody with the crest on it, and there it is. And wait until your rookie draft and try to get those deals done. Here's some veterans I want to buy. And if no one wants to sell for 110 right now, on the clock they might, and they'll be interested, and they can put a team and a player to that pick and say, yep, I want to give you that proven wide receiver profile for that pick. So just have patience. If everything else that we said does not result in more activity and more, you being happy with your team and league activity, I would say just wait, because they all wake up from their hibernation and their off-season slumber.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing too, I love all that. I found myself, so I typically find my best trades to be when I'm on the clock and I'm willing to trade down, right? When I'm willing to take a very humble approach.
It's hard to trade up, easy to trade down.
I'm very easy to trade down, right? Like, that's just how I sort of operate. In recent years, I've been less apt to have picks to trade down because I have been willing to trade them more than I ever was. However, I know that I'm pretty good, right? If I could get a pick in the mid-first round, I am good at that. That is something that I am good at, is sort of understanding the trade value, sort of moving within ranges, being open to different ideas, being flexible, and then getting value out of it. I'm trying to get myself in that position right now. So, for example, just today, I have 109 and 209 in the league. I've got later picks too, but those are the ones that are relevant to this conversation. I was going around trying to trade some different things, basically trying to either get another second or move that second way up with a backup running back. And someone gave me 201 for Samaje Perine and 209. And I said, perfect. That's going to be able to get me, I can probably jump a tier, right? If I put that 201 and the 109 together, I can jump up somewhere into the higher end of the mid first, right? That might get me into another tier. If I tack another pick or player that I'm trying to sell in that deal, right, that could jump me as well. And I find that to be particularly helpful when I've been already trying to do other things. And I've been trying to sell certain players, right? That's a tight end premium, similar to the format you were talking about in your league, where I've been trying to sell some tight ends, right? Having some additional picks, pick flexibility, put it in different ranges. Now I can sort of attach players and picks together, and maybe craft a trade that hasn't been able to work yet. Right. So kind of taking the long game on, hey, where do you ultimately want to get position wise when you're, for your picks, but also thinking, hey, now, with these reset picks, can I potentially do a deal that I might not have been able to do before? Right. So those are all things that I think are super valuable right now, and just, and keep churning it. If you like, the trade bait thing is so great because, I just was doing it today and, I haven't gotten anything done, but like you see someone post like all these players open for picks, looking for picks and want to rebuild. And you're like, oh, look, like Christian McCaffrey, come on down.
Well, even if it's not on your trade bait, you go, well, any of your players should be available
correct.
for picks in this said rebuild.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
How about your
Christian
QB1?
McCaffrey,
How about your wide
on
receiver
down.
one? Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right. Got to run out on Kelsey.
Yeah, just one comment on what you said, because we love backup running backs, but checks watch, it's March. So to say Samaje Perine is going to be, I mean, if we were week 1 was next Thursday, then yeah, Samaje Perine's in a pretty bird dog situation. But to get all the way there with Javonte Williams not playing, Samaje Perine is playing. He's some spot starter to start the year, and they didn't add anybody of note. Perine's healthy, Williams is not. Like, there's so many question marks, and we're just outlining one player. But that would be the way you quote unquote lose that deal. I guess, like that would be the method in which you lose that deal. But moving way up, like you said, to stay flexible in the early second round and you backfill, right? I mean, if we were doing waiver wires, you just pop on over to the running back store and pick someone up, off the street that is also going to have a puncher's shot of being an injury away when we get all the way to late August, early September. And so even if, and I love that the fact that deal included Pirine, which is arguably, if we're making a list of 10 running backs, right, that are backups with high intrigue right now, he's on that list. But he has a price, and you got to a flexible point where, like you just said, there's so many avenues of trading up, combining that. 201 itself provides a lot of flexibility. I mean, heck, right now, like you got Mike Evans plus, or when it's on the clock. I mean, and you 201, the one thing you didn't mention, which is also an option, 201, you add something to it when you're on the clock. Heck, that might be a hubris owner that trades their 24 first for that. So you have a lot of different options that Pirine himself doesn't give you. So when you find a trading opportunity, this is actually, let's make this a final point. When you have trading flexibility of a player that, again, the marketplace for a singular player might be low. However, when you turn it into a pick and you're thinking long term, and the pick could still turn into a player, but you got flexible. It's almost like a middle zone, right? A middleman. You turn player to pick, and it could turn back to player. But that 201, you're going to have an influx zone with the rookie draft actually coming up. It's a really good equation because Pirine on the clock at 201 is not going to give you flexibility. So 201 does, and it has nothing to do with, oh, Jordan, who are you going to take? Who are you going to take? Who's your guy? Who's your rookie guy? Is he better than Samaje Pirine? So all that talk. So this is the perfect time of year to not get hung up on running backs and individuals at that position, because we got a long way to go before they're getting 15 carries a game.
Absolutely.
All right, that's going to do it. In this episode, we discussed a lot about team building, about trading, and just about staying flexible. They're late, a lot about Patrick Mahomes, ways to do the big trade, buying and selling with those stud quarterbacks. Also talked about CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver market a little bit. Those late first, we have to recalibrate our brain. What types of format do you play? You might have one or two leagues that don't fit that. You got to make sure you do the pick math, when you're evaluating trades and when you're looking at trading opportunities, because you start putting premiums together or taking premiums away, and that can really change how 110 looks or 205 looks in a particular league. And of course, we started off by talking about eliminating the suck in your dynasty leagues, and it carries over to redraft as well. What sort of tenets are you going to have to eliminate the downside with player selection and team building strategy? I am Chad Parsons. He's Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.